The call came at 8:07 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. A pre-trial defendant had failed to appear for his scheduled court hearing. His attorney was present. The judge was ready. Prosecutors had witnesses waiting, but the defendant was nowhere to be found. His GPS ankle monitor had gone offline at 6:43 a.m. His last known location was near a major commercial district in downtown, and his charges included aggravated assault, terroristic threats, and weapons violations stemming from a workplace violence incident 6 months earlier. U.S. Marshals were activated immediately. The defendant's background created urgent concern. His original charges came from an incident where he'd threatened co-workers with violence after being reprimanded by a supervisor. The threats had escalated to bringing a weapon to work and making specific statements about harming people. Police had intervened before violence occurred, but psychological evaluation showed he harbored deep resentment about perceived workplace injustices and demonstrated concerning fixation on revenge. His pre-trial release had been controversial. Defense argued he'd complied with all conditions for 6 months. Prosecution maintained he remained dangerous and unpredictable. The judge had continued his release with strict GPS monitoring and mandatory anger management counseling. Now, he'd removed his monitor and disappeared hours before his court appearance. The GPS data showed his last location near the Meridian Tower, a 23-story office building housing approximately 2,000 employees across 40 different companies. The building was in the heart of the business district. Thousands more workers occupied adjacent buildings. Morning rush hour meant the area was filled with people commuting to work, stopping for coffee, moving through lobbies and elevators. Marshals accessed the building's directory. None of the companies matched his known employment history, but his original workplace violence incident had involved a financial services firm. The Meridian Tower housed 7 financial companies. The connection might not be coincidental. He might be targeting a similar workplace environment to the one where his original incident occurred. Building security was contacted immediately. The defendant's photo was distributed. Instructions were clear but carefully worded to avoid creating panic among 2,000 employees starting their workday. Be alert for this individual. Report sightings immediately. Do not approach. Do not confront. Maintain normal operations, but enhanced awareness. At 8:34 a.m., a security officer reported a possible sighting. Someone matching the defendant's description had entered the building at 7:52 a.m. during morning arrival rush. He'd passed through the lobby with a group of employees. Security footage was being reviewed. The sighting was 42 minutes old, but confirmed he'd been inside the building. Marshals mobilized tactical teams to the Meridian Tower. The building presented unique challenges: 23 floors, multiple elevator banks, emergency stairwells, underground parking, retail spaces on the ground level, conference facilities, a food court. The structure was designed for efficient movement of thousands of people, which made it nearly impossible to lock down or systematically search without causing evacuation that would create its own chaos. Security footage review confirmed the sighting. The defendant had entered at 7:52 a.m. wearing business casual attire and carrying a messenger bag. He'd blended perfectly with arriving employees. He'd taken an elevator to the 14th floor. After that, camera coverage became spotty. The 14th floor housed 3 companies: a marketing agency, a technology consulting firm, and a financial services company specializing in investment management. The financial services company became immediate focus. 63 employees, open floor plan with cubicles and glass-walled offices, conference rooms, break room, reception area. If the defendant was targeting a workplace similar to his original incident location, this company fit the profile exactly. Marshals coordinated with building management and the company's HR director. Discreet evacuation procedures were prepared, but evacuating one company on one floor would alert the defendant if he was observing. The decision was made to first confirm his location before initiating any evacuation that might trigger violent response. Plainclothes marshals entered the 14th floor, posing as visiting consultants. They moved through the financial services company's space, observing employees and visitors. The defendant was not immediately visible. Conference rooms were checked. Break areas were monitored. But 200 people worked on the 14th floor across 3 companies. Identifying one specific individual without creating obvious law enforcement presence required patience and systematic observation. At 9:16 a.m., an employee from the technology consulting firm reported seeing someone matching the description in the men's restroom. The employee had been washing his hands when someone entered a stall. Brief glimpse of the person's face before the door closed resembled the photo that had been circulated. The employee wasn't certain, but concerned enough to report. Marshals positioned units outside the restroom. If the defendant was inside, he was trapped. One entrance, no windows, solid walls, but confronting him in a confined space while armed could create hostage situation or provoke violence. The tactical decision was to wait, monitor the exit, confirm identity when he emerged, then execute arrest in the corridor away from the restroom's confined space. 12 minutes passed. The restroom remained occupied, but no one exited. Thermal imaging from outside couldn't penetrate the walls effectively. Audio surveillance detected movement inside, but couldn't confirm how many people were present. The waiting created tension. Every minute he remained inside was another minute of uncertainty about his intentions and capabilities. At 9:28 a.m., he exited the restroom. Visual confirmation was immediate. The defendant walked calmly down the corridor toward the elevator bank. Marshals moved to intercept before he could reach the elevators. Commands were given. Federal agents, stop, show your hands, do not move. He stopped, but didn't comply immediately. His hands remained at his sides. His expression showed recognition that he was caught, but also calculation about options. Marshals surrounded him from multiple angles. Distance was maintained. Weapons were ready, but not drawn openly, to avoid alarming office workers who were watching the confrontation. Then his hands moved slowly upward, not reaching for anything, just raising in the universal gesture of surrender. He was directed to turn and face the wall. He complied. He was approached, searched, and handcuffed efficiently. The entire sequence took 28 seconds from first command to secured custody. The search revealed concerning items. The messenger bag contained a knife with a 6-inch blade, written notes detailing building layouts and employee schedules, photographs of the financial services company's office space, and a manifesto-style document expressing anger about workplace injustice and describing fantasies of revenge against corporate environments. No firearms were found, but the knife and documents demonstrated he'd been planning something. The building reconnaissance, the employee schedules, the written fantasies about revenge, all suggested he'd been preparing for potential violence, even if the execution timing remained uncertain. Building security initiated discreet evacuation of the 14th floor. Employees were told there was a maintenance issue requiring temporary relocation to conference facilities on other floors. The evacuation proceeded calmly. Most employees never knew they'd been working on the same floor as someone who'd been planning workplace violence. The arrest location was processed as a crime scene. Evidence was photographed and collected. The restroom where he'd been hiding was searched. Additional notes were found in a trash receptacle. He'd been writing and discarding drafts of what appeared to be a final statement. The content was disturbing. References to making people understand his pain, forcing recognition of injustices, creating a moment that would be remembered. Interrogation began at the federal building. He was advised of his rights. He chose to remain silent on advice of counsel, but the evidence spoke for itself. The notes, the photographs, the knife, the building reconnaissance, combined with his violation of pretrial release conditions and failure to appear in court, the charges would be substantial. Psychological evaluation was ordered. Experts needed to assess whether his planning had reached the point of imminent action or remained in fantasy stage. The distinction mattered for charging decisions and threat assessment. His written documents suggested someone moving from fantasy toward action, but absence of firearms and specific timeline indicated he might not have reached final implementation stage. The building's 2,000 employees continued their workday, largely unaware of what had occurred. Some had witnessed the arrest. Others heard rumors of a security incident. But most went about their business without knowing that workplace violence had been prevented on their floor by less than 2 hours. The financial services company where he'd been found conducted employee briefings. Information was shared carefully. A potentially dangerous individual had been located and arrested. Law enforcement had responded effectively. Enhanced security would remain in place temporarily. Employees were encouraged to report any suspicious behavior, but assured that the immediate threat had been eliminated. Several employees recognized the defendant from his building reconnaissance. He'd been seen in the lobby on previous occasions, walking through floors, observing office layouts. At the time, people assumed he was a job applicant or visiting consultant. No one had connected the observations into a pattern suggesting surveillance until after the arrest, when memories were reviewed. That recognition created profound unease. He'd been studying the building and its occupants for an unknown period. He'd learned schedules and routines. He'd photographed workspaces, all while employees went about their daily activities unaware they were being targeted for potential violence. The violation of that safety created lasting impact on workplace culture. The original company, where his workplace violence incident had occurred, was notified. His former co-workers had lived with restraining orders and fear for 6 months. Learning he'd been targeting a different but similar workplace brought both relief and horror. Relief, they weren't his current focus. Horror, that he'd transferred his violent fantasies to innocent strangers who had no connection to his original grievances. Federal prosecutors assembled charges beyond his original counts: violation of pretrial release, possession of weapon by prohibited person, stalking, making terroristic threats, interstate travel to commit violence. Each charge carried significant prison time. Combined with his original charges, conviction would mean decades in federal custody. His attorney argued mental illness required treatment rather than punishment. The prosecution countered that dangerous individuals needed incarceration regardless of illness. The judge would ultimately decide, but public safety concerns would heavily influence any decision about his future. Building security protocols were reviewed and enhanced. The incident demonstrated vulnerabilities in access control. Someone with no legitimate business in the building had entered repeatedly, accessed multiple floors, and conducted surveillance without being challenged. Improvements included enhanced ID verification, visitor escort requirements, and security personnel training on recognizing surveillance behavior. The financial services company implemented additional measures: employee awareness training about workplace violence indicators, anonymous reporting systems for concerning behavior, mental health resources for employees processing the trauma of learning they'd been targeted, and physical security upgrades, including panic buttons and enhanced surveillance. For marshals who worked the operation, success was measured in prevented tragedy. The defendant had been planning something: the knife, the notes, the reconnaissance. Whether he would have acted that day or some future date remained unknown, but arresting him eliminated the possibility. 2,000 employees were protected from potential violence they'd been unaware of until after the threat was neutralized. The case demonstrated the importance of pre-trial monitoring. His GPS ankle monitor had functioned exactly as designed. When he removed it, the alert triggered immediately. Marshals responded within minutes. His location was tracked to a specific building. The response prevented whatever he'd been planning from reaching execution stage. It also demonstrated the challenges of monitoring individuals with mental health issues. He'd complied with pre-trial conditions for 6 months. He'd attended required counseling. He'd reported as scheduled. Nothing in his monitored behavior suggested imminent danger. Then something shifted. A trigger occurred, and he moved from compliance to planning violence in a window too brief for intervention until he'd already violated conditions. Mental health professionals studied the case for insights into workplace violence prediction. His written documents showed clear progression from grievance to fantasy to planning. The reconnaissance demonstrated movement toward action, but timing remained unpredictable. Without the GPS violation alert, he might have remained undetected until violence occurred. The technology had provided the margin that saved lives. Victim advocacy groups emphasized the broader implications. Workplace violence affected thousands of people annually. Some incidents were prevented. Others resulted in casualties. The defendant's case showed both the warning signs and the challenges of intervention. Enhanced awareness and reporting systems could identify threats earlier, but privacy concerns and resource limitations complicated proactive monitoring. The Meridian Tower became a case study in corporate security. The building's management shared lessons learned with other commercial properties: the importance of visitor screening, the need for employee awareness training, the value of good relationships with law enforcement for rapid response. Every element that contributed to successful resolution was documented and disseminated. For the employees who worked in the building, the incident created lasting awareness. Many became more conscious of people around them. Unfamiliar faces prompted mental questions about legitimate presence. Suspicious behavior was reported rather than ignored. The heightened vigilance was both protective and exhausting, gradually diminishing over time, but never fully returning to the casual openness that existed before. The defendant remained in federal custody, awaiting trial. His mental state was evaluated repeatedly. Medication was prescribed to manage his symptoms, but treatment couldn't erase his actions or eliminate the threat he'd posed. he would face justice in federal court with evidence that documented his planning and intent. His family struggled with the aftermath. They'd known he was troubled. They'd encouraged him to comply with pre-trial conditions and attend counseling. They'd hoped treatment would address his issues. Learning he'd been planning violence against strangers devastated them. They cooperated with investigators, but mourned the person he'd become. The original workplace where his violence had started implemented enhanced screening for employees showing concerning behavior. The incident had cost the company productivity, legal fees, and employee trauma. Preventing similar situations required investment in mental health resources, conflict resolution systems, and security measures. The financial and human costs justified the investment. For law enforcement agencies, the case reinforced the importance of GPS monitoring for high-risk defendants. The technology wasn't perfect. Determined individuals could remove devices, but the immediate alert when removal occurred provided the window for intervention. Without that alert, the defendant might have remained free until violence occurred. The knife recovered from his messenger bag was analyzed. It had been purchased 3 days earlier from a sporting goods store. The purchase wasn't illegal for someone not yet convicted, but combined with his reconnaissance activities and written documents, it demonstrated progression toward violence. Each piece of evidence individually seemed concerning but explainable. Together, they painted a clear picture of dangerous planning. The written documents were studied by threat assessment experts. The language showed escalating commitment to action. Early drafts expressed anger, but remained vague about intentions. Later drafts became specific about targets and methods. The final draft, found in the restroom trash, described detailed scenarios of workplace attacks. The progression was textbook example of someone moving from fantasy to operational planning. Prosecutors considered federal terrorism charges based on the written threats and planning. The definition included attempts to intimidate civilian populations through violence. His documents clearly described intent to create fear and force attention to his grievances. Whether that met legal standards for terrorism would be argued in court. The Tuesday morning when he failed to appear in court had started as a routine hearing. By noon, it had become a prevented mass casualty event. 2,000 employees had gone to work expecting another ordinary day. Law enforcement had ensured that expectation was met by identifying and neutralizing a threat before it could materialize. The building returned to normal operations by Wednesday. Enhanced security remained visible, but didn't disrupt business. Employees processed their feelings about the incident through workplace counseling and personal reflection. Life continued because professionals had done their work effectively and prevented tragedy. For U.S. Marshals, the operation was added to the record of successful fugitive apprehensions. 1 pre-trial defendant violated conditions. 1 manhunt was conducted. 1 arrest was executed. 0 casualties occurred. The statistics captured the outcome, but not the full story of what had been prevented. The defendant, who'd planned revenge against a workplace that wasn't even his original target, would spend years in federal prison. His anger and perceived injustices would not be resolved through violence. His victims would be spared trauma, and 2,000 people who worked in the Meridian Tower would continue their careers without experiencing the horror he'd been planning. For one Tuesday morning, the margin between safety and tragedy was measured in hours. From the moment his GPS monitor went offline to the moment he was arrested in a 14th floor corridor, less than 3 hours had passed. In that window, law enforcement had identified his location, coordinated response, and executed arrest before his planning could become action. The efficiency of that response was what separated a normal workday from a national tragedy.